Constitution Clause, here to talk to you about the United States Constitution. What am I doing here, boys and girls? Well, the good people of the West Springfield Social Studies Department wanted me to talk to you about the Constitution in order to prepare you for your Virginia state exam coming up very soon. Ha ha ho! And if you pay attention, not only will you know more about the Constitution, but if you're a good little boy and girl, maybe you'll get a Constitution on Constitution Day next year. Ha ha ho! Let's move on with the Constitution, boys and girls. The Constitution of the United States of America was actually not our first government. No, boys and girls. It was the Articles of Confederation that were our first government in the United States after we became independent from the evil Great Britain. The Articles of Confederation was set up because many Americans were very fearful of a powerful central government. The powerful central government is what they just broke away from with the King of England. They did not want to be another King of England or a King of the United States, so the Americans were very, very fearful of this central government. So the Founding Fathers set up a very weak national government. Now, while it would have its problems, it would certainly have some successes as well. But it was our first government. Let's talk more about the Articles of Confederation, shall we? The Articles of Confederation were very important for the states. The Articles of Confederation gave many, many power to the states and very few power to the actual central government because, again, of that fearfulness. So it was the states that received the most power in the Articles of Confederation, boys and girls. The Articles of Confederation also only had one branch of government. That's right, a legislative branch of government. How many branches of government do we have today, boys and girls? 3 is correct. The legislative, the executive, and the judicial. But at this time, boys and girls, it was only the legislative branch, only one branch. No executive and no judicial. So under the Articles of Confederation, there was no president and there was no Supreme Court as well. Only a legislative branch, which today would be the House of Representatives and the Senate. So, with the Articles of Confederation, each state received one vote in Congress. That seems fair to me, boys and girls, doesn't it? Oh, no, you say it's very not? That is correct. It is not very fair. The states that were very, very large had a major problem with only having one vote. States like Virginia, states like Massachusetts, and New York said, hey, we're big, big states. We should have more say in the government than tiny little Rhode Island or tiny little Connecticut. This isn't very fair. So they were very upset that each state only had one vote. They wanted the bigger states to have more votes and the smaller states to have fewer votes. But that's the way it was under the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation also had a major, major problem. They were not able to get the, I believe Mr. Spicer calls it the dollar bills. Yes, the Articles of Confederation had no power to tax, boys and girls. This was a major, major problem in the Articles of Confederation because the Articles of Confederation were always broke. Always broke, boys and girls. They were never able to raise enough money in order to function. They could not regulate commerce among the states either, boys and girls. They were only able to really regulate some things, and the taxation was not one of them. So they were always broke. The other major problem they had was no common currency. Imagine this, boys and girls. Imagine if you were to go to this state over here, Pennsylvania, I believe. If you were to go to Pennsylvania from Virginia, not that far away, you'd have to get a Pennsylvania currency and trade in your Virginia currency. Mighty, mighty silly. And that was a major problem in the Articles of Confederation. No common currency either. So, boys and girls, people realized with no power to tax, with the common currency being an issue, and with something that you shouldn't concern yourselves with called Shays' Rebellion, the Constitutional Convention was called. People said, ho, ho, ho! This is not going to work. this is not going to work at all, this Articles of Confederation. And so a new constitution was to be written. Now, the Virginia Plan was the first plan of government that was introduced at this Constitutional Convention, as we will call it. It was introduced as the Virginia Plan because a gentleman from Virginia, who we'll be talking of momentarily, very, very wise man, this man, introduced the three branches of government. He said that the government should have a legislative branch, one branch that makes the laws, an executive branch which rules over and enforces the laws, and the judicial branch which rules if the laws are allowed or not. That, boys and girls, was the Virginia Plan with a legislative, an executive, and a judicial. This would go on to become the foundation for the structure of the new government of the United States. Well, and what a government it will be. So, one of the major problems was the very, very small states were known as the New Jersey Plan. They favored the New Jersey Plan. Very, very small states like New Jersey said, whoa, 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 we demand that each state has the same number of representatives, regardless of how big it is. New Jersey thinks they're important. They're also a little bit of a smelly state, but they think they're important too. Virginia, on the other hand, says, no, it should be the bigger states that have the bigger control. They're the ones that are bigger. They should have more of a say. And that was the Virginia Plan of Government. Luckily for us, controversy was averted by the Great Compromise. The Great Compromise is when the large states and small states had their debate settled. Here's how it was settled, boys and girls. The large states would be represented in the House of Representatives, and the small states would be represented in the Senate, as it would be called. And that was known as the Great Compromise of the United States. It ensured proper legislation in the legislative branch. Now, the Great Compromise had Senate with equal, that was the New Jersey Plan, boys and girls, and the House of Representatives would be based on population. That was the Virginia Plan, boys and girls. So it satisfied both people, and everyone was almost as happy as can be. Ho, ho, ho! Boy, were they. Now, another problem was, how do we constitute these slaves that are going on, that are in our country at this point in time? The bigger states that had slaves, like Virginia, said, well, of course they should count as a person. But the smaller states, like New Jersey, said, no, 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 no. They don't get to vote. They don't have rights. There's no way we should count them as a part of a state's population. Well, once again, they came to another compromise, and it was called the 3/5 Compromise, in which slaves would be counted as 3/5 of one person, and that was known as the 3/5 Compromise. And it would be in effect in the House of Representatives. Next, boys and girls, is this idea of checks and balances. Checks and balances is at the heart of the Constitution of the United States. Because you see, by looking at this handy-dandy chart over here, that one branch never has one big control compared to the other. The executive branch can do certain things. For example, the executive branch can veto laws that come out of the legislative branch, but the legislative branch can override those presidential vetoes. The executive branch can appoint a federal judge, but the judicial branch, showing that they're not beholden to the executive branch, can also outweigh laws that the executive branch is doing, outweigh actions that the executive branch is doing. So each branch had the ability to overrule the other, and that was called checks and balances. Checks and balances. Now, what about the states? Why would the states have agreed to this? Well, because the states still had some power. Even though the Constitution was now the federal law of the land and the supreme law of the land, the states still had some ability to control themselves. That was called federalism. when the states have a little bit of power to control themselves. And that's why the states agreed to it. Now, there were some key leaders. Constitution clause is awfully old. Ho, ho, ho! But I'm not that old, boys and girls. I wasn't at the Constitutional Convention. Luckily for us, other people were at the Constitutional Convention. George Washington, for example, was the president of the Constitutional Convention. What did he do as president of the Constitutional Convention? Oh, George Washington, he lent his enormous prestige. Even though he didn't say much, as a hero of the American Revolution, he was able to lend his enormous prestige, and it said that this was business, this was the deal. If George Washington's doing it, these guys are probably not a bunch of wackos. They are people who know what they're doing. So George Washington was president of the convention who lent his enormous prestige, even though he didn't participate. He didn't talk really all that much. Who was arguably the most important person there? James Madison. Remember we talked about the Virginia Plan, boys and girls? Well, he was the author of the Virginia Plan, and by many, he is considered the father of the Constitution. The man with the plan, if you will say. Ha, 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 the man with the plan. He was the one who came up with the Virginia Plan and was the father of the Constitution. Many of his ideas are still in the Constitution today, interestingly enough. He took an enormous amount of notes on the Constitution that scholars can look at today to see what the founders were thinking when they were writing the Constitution. And later on, after some help from his good friend George Mason, he's going to write what's called the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights, we will see, are very important in the Constitution. The Constitution, even though it was so great and wonderful and perfect, boys and girls, shows that there were many people who had some issues with this Constitution. For example, if you look at the green here, they were the people that were for the Constitution, all up and down the coasts. But the people who were kind of in the backwoods, the farmers, they were mighty against the Constitution. It was a very close vote in some states, and in some states, it almost took a second time to pass it too. But the ratification of the Constitution does take place. Who are those people who were for it, and who are they against it? Well, here you see the Federalists who said, we need a strong national government, and the Anti-Federalists who say, no, we don't. Federalists were in favor of the Constitution. They believed the Articles of Confederation was way too weak to solve the issues that were going on in the country at the time. The Anti-Federalists, oh boy, they were against the Constitution, saying that it was too powerful. Now, what did the Federalists also believe? The Federalists believe in a very strong central government to promote economic development. They believed that the government needed to be stronger, and that was the Federalists. On the opposite side, we have the Anti-Federalists, which we'll get to momentarily. Now, today, those who see the role of the federal government in solving problems are, boys and girls, do you know? The Democratic Party were those people, or the liberals would be people who believe that the federal government has a role to solve national problems. They are the heirs to this Federalist tradition today. On the opposite side, we have the Anti-Federalists, who we'll get to momentarily. The Virginia proponents for ratification, those who were Federalists, George Washington and James Madison. They believed the Constitution needed to be written. They believed it needed to be passed. They were strong Federalists. The Anti-Federalists were against ratification. They believed that the powerful government was being far, far too powerful, and they thought that the individuals and the states needed to have more rights, and so they were against the ratification of the Constitution. Anti-Federalists who thought the states should have more power. Today, more conservative thinkers echo the concerns of championing liberty, individual initiative, and free markets. They believed in more of a state-controlled government, not a federal national control of the government. Some other key people you should be aware of. Patrick Henry and George Mason, who were strongly against the ratification of the Constitution. George Mason and Patrick Henry thought that the Constitution was too powerful, too much in the hands of the federal government. As a matter of fact, the Federalists had to make concessions. The Anti-Federalists got their way when the Bill of Rights was passed. The Bill of Rights was passed in part with the help of George Mason. George Mason wrote the Virginia Declaration of Rights. He was the one who brought the idea of individual rights being brought into the Constitution, worried that a federal government was going to trample over the rights of the individuals, and so he passed what was called the Virginia Declaration of Rights. He wrote the Virginia Declaration of Rights. His idea, basic human rights should not be violated by the government. Another famous person that was involved in the Bill of Rights, this guy, you may know him, Thomas Jefferson. Ho, 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 Thomas Jefferson. He was a person who wrote the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, which said that the federal government needed to not favor one church, that there was no national church, should never be a national church, and should instead have a freedom of religion. Both of those documents would make it into the Bill of Rights written by James Madison, the father of the Constitution, who consulted the Virginia Declaration of Rights by George Mason and the Virginia Statute of Religious Freedom by Thomas Jefferson when he was looking at drafting the Bill of Rights, which is still around today. The Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. And you see right here, boys and girls, many of them are when you may get in trouble. So be careful. But I know you are good boys and girls, so you will never get in trouble and you will instead follow the Constitution. But if you do, you know how to follow the Constitution with the Bill of Rights. Well, boys and girls, ho, ho, ho! I must go now because the Lake Braddock Bruins need some double extra help, some double remediation from Constitution Clause because they don't have nearly as good as help as you folks do. So have a good rest of your day, study hard for those Virginia SOLs, and be careful about what may happen when Constitution Clause